Right now, in several places on Earth, the temperature has crossed a line most people have never heard of, and once you cross it, a fan won't cool you down. It'll push you toward heat stroke faster. That's not a typo. Under specific conditions, turning on a fan can make you more likely to overheat and die, not less. And those conditions already exist on this planet today. To understand why, you first need to understand what your body is actually doing when you're hot. Because most people think the answer is sweating. It isn't. Not exactly. Sweating isn't the cooling mechanism, it's the delivery system. The actual mechanism is evaporation, liquid turning into vapor, pulling heat energy away with it. When sweat evaporates off your skin, it carries body heat with it into the air. That's your cooling system. Sweat that just sits on your skin unevaporated does nothing for you. This is why a humid 32 degrees Celsius day feels so much worse than a dry 32 degrees Celsius day. In dry air, sweat evaporates almost as fast as it appears. You barely notice you're sweating. In humid air, the atmosphere is already saturated with moisture. Evaporation slows to a crawl and sweat just sits there. You feel like you're suffocating in your own skin because, in a very real sense, your cooling system is being throttled, and your body is always making heat that needs to go somewhere. At rest, you produce around 80 watts, roughly what an old incandescent bulb draws. Get moving, and that number climbs past 600, even 700 watts. All of that heat has to leave your body, and evaporation is the main exit ramp. For more than 200 years, scientists have measured exactly when that exit ramp closes using a device that's almost embarrassingly simple: a wet bulb thermometer. Wrap a damp cloth around a regular thermometer, expose it to air, and as water evaporates off the cloth, it cools the thermometer down. That reading, like the wet bulb temperature, tells you how efficiently evaporation is working in that exact spot at that exact moment. In dry air, the wet bulb reading sits well below the actual air temperature because water evaporates easily. In humid air, that gap narrows. In fully saturated air, about 100% humidity, there's no evaporation left to measure, and the wet bulb temperature and the air temperature become the same number. And there's one wet bulb number where the physics simply stop working in your favor: 35 degrees Celsius. That's the wall. Your internal body temperature sits around 37 degrees Celsius. For heat to leave your body, the surrounding air has to be willing to accept it, cooler or drier or both. At a wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees Celsius, the air is so hot and so saturated that evaporation off your skin drops to almost nothing. You keep sweating, it keeps not helping. Your core temperature climbs uncontrolled, not like a fever your body chooses to run, but a rise it can't stop. Left unchecked, that's heat stroke, organ failure, death, in that order. Now here's where the fan comes back in. Below your skin temperature, a fan works exactly the way you'd expect. It speeds up evaporation, it helps you cool down, but once the air temperature climbs above roughly 35 degrees Celsius past your own skin temperature, that fan stops being a cooling tool. It's now blowing air that's hotter than you are directly onto you. You start absorbing heat from the moving air instead of losing it. The fan becomes a convection heater pointed at your body, the same principle that makes a fan oven cook food faster than a still one. This isn't hypothetical. In 2024, physiologists at the University of Ottawa put adults aged 65 to 85 through extreme indoor heat with fans running, and found the fans did not lower their peak core temperature. The small reductions they did see were too minor to matter clinically. Around the same time, researchers at Lakehead University found that once indoor air passed roughly 43 degrees Celsius in low humidity, fan use pushed core temperature and heart rate higher than sitting in still air did. For elderly people especially, whose bodies are already less efficient at shedding heat, a fan in the wrong conditions doesn't buy time. It costs it. Here's the part that should genuinely worry you. For years, climate scientists assumed a sustained 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb reading was a future problem, something climate models projected for the middle of this century, not something already happening. They were wrong. A 2020 study in Science Advances went back through 4 decades of weather station records and found that spots along the Persian Gulf studied including a station at Abu Dhabi International Airport, a city of roughly 1.5 million people, had already brushed against or briefly touched that 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb limit. So had parts of South Asia and the Gulf Coast of the United States. These events lasted an hour, sometimes two, not days. But they happened decades ahead of schedule, and extreme humid heat events like them have more than doubled in frequency since 1979. One of the most cited examples: Bandar Mashar, Iran, July 31st, 2015. Air temperature around 46 degrees Celsius. The wet bulb reading came close enough to 35 degrees Celsius that researchers still reference it as one of the most extreme heat and humidity events ever measured at a populated weather station. People were living there, people were outside. Climate models now project that parts of South Asia, the Persian Gulf, and the Red Sea region will start crossing the 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb threshold regularly by around 2050. Eastern China, Southeast Asia, and parts of Brazil follow by roughly 2070. That's not a problem for some distant future generation. Some of the people it will affect are already alive right now. But here's the twist: 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb is actually the optimistic number. That figure is the theoretical survival limit for a young, healthy adult at rest in a lab, doing nothing but sitting there. Real life isn't a lab. Once you account for age, pre-existing health conditions, physical exertion, and whether someone has shade or shelter, dangerous heat stress for most people actually starts closer to a wet bulb temperature of 28 degrees Celsius. For elderly people, that number drops further still. For someone doing physical labor outdoors, their own body is generating extra heat that has nowhere to go, so their personal threshold arrives sooner than anyone else's. That's why the people dying from extreme heat right now generally aren't sitting in an air-conditioned office watching a thermometer. They're farm workers in India and Pakistan, construction crews in the Gulf, elderly people in unair-conditioned apartments during a heat wave nobody warned them about, which is roughly what happened across Europe in the summer of 2003, when an estimated 70,000 excess deaths were linked to the heat, many of them among elderly people alone in their homes. 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb is the point where survival becomes physically impossible for anyone. Full stop. But the range between 28 degrees Celsius and 35 degrees Celsius is where almost all of the actual deaths happen. And we are spending more time inside that range every single year. So when a fan makes things worse, it's not because fans are dangerous. It's because the exact conditions that flip a fan from helpful to harmful, hot enough, humid enough, now exist in real places, more often, for longer, and almost nobody is watching the one number that would warn them. We track air temperature, we track the heat index, we get warnings to drink water and stay in the shade. The one number that actually tells you whether your body's cooling system can still function at all barely makes the news. 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb, that's the wall. Below it, your body has options. Sweat, shade, water, airflow, all help. Above it, none of those things change the outcome. The physics have already decided. Parts of the world are already touching that wall. More of them will reach it. And for billions of people in those places, the one thing that reliably works past that threshold, air conditioning, isn't something they have access to. So next time it's brutally hot and you reach for the fan without thinking, you'll at least know what it can actually do for you and what it can't.